All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And joining with me, as always, is my trusted co-host, Tony Tressalt, and a special guest today from, I believe, somewhere in the woods of Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, is a longtime colleague and, I would consider him one of my mentors, Mr. Tim Ard. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
Um, Tim, um, we always kind of kick things off with a simple question, and that question being, if you think back to the first time that you remember you having an affinity or a connection to trees or the forest, can you think of a time when that first memory comes to you? Where were you? What were you doing?
Well, it wasn't a good thing for the tree, I don't think, but it was my my father and I were cutting firewood back in the early '70s, I guess, and so we heated the house partially with it, and
Okay.
he and I went together and bought a little chainsaw and started to. Well, he got that one. With the second one we actually bought together, but we started cutting some firewood together and splitting that and stacking it, and then we started working around the woods there a little bit. We had a few acres and started working around cleaning up stuff. But that was the early '70s.
Okay, and what was it? The chainsaw, the trees, the combination thereof, working with your father.
Yeah, it was kind of all three, really. I guess I've always really enjoyed the woods. We did some camping and always had a lot going on around the property with cleaning up stuff and that kind of stuff. So we started to do it ourselves. Had an uncle that did a lot of it for us for a while, and then he bought the little saw and we started doing the firewood, and then later we bought a bigger one together, and I still had. But I guess what really would get with me the most as forest was one of the first trips I was able to make to the Pacific Northwest, when right after Mount St. Helens, Stihl had a big meeting out there. I think it was like 1981 or something like that, and we were out there, and that's the first time trees really reached out to touch you. And you feel like an ant.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
absolutely. I'm curious what saw it was, the first saw that, you said you bought another one together. What was that first saw?
that was a 25 DA
A 25D. Okay.
rolling. And then the one we bought together was a Husqvarna 65, and
Oh, yeah.
I had that. It was in my dad's barn when he passed away, and I brought it up here, and it stayed with me. And about 6 months ago, I guess I cleaned that thing up, and I did a little video on it. It's on a YouTube site, and it,
Okay.
I cleaned it up. It looks almost like brand new, and I'll be doggone if it didn't crank like the first or second pull.
Well, that 65, I mean, that was a flagship almost, wasn't it? That was a really, I remember posters, and that's how it was, it was everywhere. It was a real
And the
popular
65
saw.
and the 77 was in the logwoods. That's where it really started in U.S. and Canada. Really, that was the one that really got a lot of sales.
Well, I really, when I think back on chainsawing, I really, my knowledge of falling and my knowing how to fell and how it worked, really began when I first took a course from you, Tim. And I'm curious, obviously you weren't born into the techniques that you teach today. What, what kind of felling lessons did you learn witnessing your father fall? Or you learning with him, or your uncle?
Well, I watched my uncle cut some, and but my father and I we didn't cut down that many trees. Most of what we did was cleaning up and firewood and stuff. But
Oh,
but
okay. Yeah,
at
yeah.
that time. but my uncle did some. He took down some that we cut up. But then, most of my experience with it is after I had a shop for about 4 years, and one of the sales guys came by and he had a poster and he was talking about cutting techniques. We got into that, because I was doing these sale days and stuff on weekends, and I was carving stuff at that time a little bit, and
Okay.
so he had this poster of this thing from this guy from Sweden, and they were a Jonsered rep, and
Okay.
so he had this poster of this guy named Soren Eriksson, and it was
Yeah.
old, and I still have an old one, and anyhow, I just became intrigued by it, and he started telling me about it and all that kind of stuff, and then later on, um, when I actually worked at the distributorship, steel distributorship in Georgia, and one of the sales reps was Dave Zerfoss. He came
Uh-huh.
by, and more or less we started discussing that he was. I don't know. Somehow it came up. He said, well, I met him over in Alabama at Rocky Creek Logging. And so we started communicating. And Soren was trying to put together a thing with Scott Paper Company on his competition for the training. And
Yeah.
so I was asked to go over and help kind of pick up trash and do that kind of stuff. But got over there and met him, and then he was going to do some other demos for Stihl around Georgia, and so I helped organize some of those, and he and I just kind of hit it off, and that's when he started teaching me about the techniques, and I became his his right hand man as far as carrying stuff and cleaning up stuff, and I kept his saws going, and he started teaching me on the cutting, so I was kind of a
Interesting.
Swedish shadow for many years.
Well, I knew that there was a connection with you and Soren. I didn't. You've probably told me that before, but I couldn't remember all the details. And one thing I wasn't aware of is that the origins were with Still. I always have connected your and Soren's time with Husqvarna for some reason. When did that, or how did that transition take
Well,
place?
he sold out his training company Nordfor at that time. He had two other partners, and one of them passed away. They sold the company to Electrolux, and
Okay.
and I guess they it's still kind of a division today, I'm sure. But he then came came to the United States and had the work with West Vaco and Weyerhaeuser and Scott Paper and Union Camp, and so he was doing training on that, and then he started producing safety apparels. He started Swede for, and then started doing safety apparels for Stihl. And he had a little plant, it's about the size of my studio here in Eclectic, Alabama, and about three ladies were sewing chaps and pants
Uh-huh.
and shirts and all that kind of stuff, and so I got involved in helping to design and test stuff and
Okay.
all of that. And then when Dave Zerfoss left, we kind of moved back over to Husqvarna. So
Yeah, because
and
Dave was with Still originally as well. Yeah.
because Soren was sponsored by John Shred and Husqvarna for years, did never do anything with steel. But then when he came to the states, then they got him involved
I see.
that's how I met him, and then we kind of swapped back over following following Dave, and I guess it was about 91 or 92, somewhere through there.
In regards to felling techniques, particularly, and I think specifically the notching and back cutting, um, it was the first time I saw an open notch and understood the advantages of it, and also the advantage of a bore plunge cut, and the advantages it offered you. Thanks to the way you delivered that instruction and the way you delivered it was able to synthesize it and appreciate it, and then given the permission to try it for myself, encouraged to do that, not just accept it as carte blanche fact, like go ahead, try it, and it was all things you did. and I've modeled that after those lessons you taught me. But when you started teaching that stuff, was it pretty foreign? And I mean, even to this day, I think there's people that just are shocked that it's not a 45. They just default automatically 45-degree opening. And we always talk about that coming from cross-cutting axes, and it kind of naturally lended itself to a 45. But even notch depth, all of that, is a trend changing, or how hard was it for you to bring that message that sort of flew in the face of traditional practice?
It's kind of still that way today.
I
Every,
know.
everything that talk about and do, and people have a vision of a very narrow face notch, and deeper you go, the easier it is to fall, and all of that kind of thing. Um, Soren, always kind of explained it as, you want that tree to move, or that limb that you cut to move this amount. And he says, it's not, a standard. It's not a conventional. It's not a Humboldt. It's a notch that's open enough to allow it to work. And so that's the reason why he called it open face. And that was the biggest thing to me. And like when I started working with Forest Service to put together some different aspects of their program, which is finally out now, is forget about what it's called
Yeah,
and think about what it does.
exactly.
And I mean, you can have a Humboldt that's 70 degrees or more. The key there is to allow a movement to a point to where the the fiber bends and then breaks. It doesn't pull.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not too thick to mess up and split either.
That's one thing that a lot of people like. It seems like it's a natural reaction to leave a hinge thicker because somehow that's better. And I've always struggled to specifically explain, and maybe I'm curious, how do you explain the disadvantages or the limitations of leaving it even just a little too thick? Like if you look at the stump and you can see the fibers that compressed and hinged and the fibers that were pulled and broken, and you can even feel it. Especially tactile works really well. And you can clearly see where the 10% rule of thumb comes from on most diameter trees, not all. But what is it about it being too thick that causes problems?
Well, I think it was easily explained to the logging community and the mills, but the toughest part was to arborists and city,
Yeah,
county, state
yeah,
governments, because you know your basic thing was to get that piece off. You weren't really worried about pulled fiber. You were just, some safety was there to be a concern, but basically you weren't concerned about pulled fiber. You were just kind of concerned about getting that piece or that tree to where
sure.
you wanted it to go. And so when it started, like with Soren with the logging, it was a quality issue. If you went more than about 10% of the diameter of the tree, for some reason, most all species, you would start to get splitting and long grain pulling, and the mills just wouldn't accept that. So then the alternative to that was a loss of safety, because when they stayed there with it so long, trying to keep it from splitting and pulling, then they ended up with struck bys and damage to themselves, and also lost control that damaged other residual site trees. And so it became something that caught on in the logging community, but everything else was, well, it didn't catch on completely, because you still have those people who say no, this is better. But it's something that's how we really sold the program, was quality and control.
Hmm.
And when you think about directional felling, the the biggest thing there is you reduce so much of the struck by situations and all by controlling that tree to an opening, as you would do with rigging.
Yeah.
You're controlling it precisely to where you want it to go. And that was the biggest thing. But it's I think that still felling and even cutting larger limbs and things, people are still intimidated by it. I mean, you can watch videos on YouTube and you see that they really don't have a plan. They're just kind of cutting, and it's work for them. They're still alive. They're not dead, but some people aren't so fortunate.
Well, yeah, to say the least, because the statistics are not only high in logging, but in arboriculture as well. And we're well aware of those. And I think that is the one thing that I remember the most. I mean, there were so many things I learned in the course with you, but afterwards, what happened to me was confidence. I think this is the best word I can use is confidence, because by following the plan that as you laid it out, I could remove so many variables. I could stop and check and ascertain that I know that this opening will allow my tree to hinge until it's on the ground. Therefore, as long as the hinge is healthy, so to speak, or sound wood, it's going to not break. By using a bore cut, I don't have to release the tree while I'm cutting. I can control exactly when it starts to fall. I can make sure that hinge is about as good as I can make it, and I can actually measure and stop and check it. I can make sure everybody's away from my tree. I can stop and literally take a look around and, without the saw running, tell people, stay back, I'm going to release this tree. And even that, by just releasing it, by having that holding wood or strap or trigger, it has lots of different names, but people aren't watching, wondering when the tree's going to start to go. My saw fires up, the tree, you hear it run for a very brief moment in time. It's turned off, you hear the click of the brake, and the tree's already starting to go. And even that, I'm already down the escape route. Like I'm already, just by the way I can position myself, I can release the tree from already safer distance. It's just, and there's so many times I couldn't count how many times that the light bulb goes off. That where people that have been following for a while and have experienced close calls or near misses, or whatever you want to call them, in that danger zone that we call the 5 foot zone, which is another topic. But the sooner you're out of there, the sooner you're more than at least 5 feet away. We teach that quite stringently. Your chances of being hurt go way down when we use the term 90%. And you don't stop at 5 foot 1 inch. You get the further the safer. Risk and proximity, they're so closely connected, right? The closer you are, the greater the risk. And that's the principle that I'm still passionate about today. You can probably hear it. And it's just a beautiful thing. And I think you feel the same way.
No, I mean, there's no negatives
Yep.
to it. I mean, really, and the other thing is that when you also get the mindset that you're incorporating that with directional felling, that you have the abilities by taking the proper
Yes.
leans and looking to see where can I place that tree without hitting another tree, because that's the key to future harvest or maintenance and everything else is don't bust up
Yep.
everything else
Yep.
around you. And so you've got the ability to reduce residual site damage. And if you think about that, your eyeball is starting to look to see what's going to happen when that tree moves a little bit. That limb's going to break. It's going to push back. It could fall out. So I'm going to put my tail in a position that's out of the way. And so then you decide, well, do I pull it with a rope? Do I lift it with a wedge? Or does it have enough forward lean to go by releasing it? And that even gives me more abilities all three ways when I put those tools to work. I mean, there's really no negatives except for people say, oh, it's too slow. It's too slow.
Well, and the fact that you have to use the tip of the saw because the tip is dangerous. That's another one where I have to say I had never understood. No one had ever educated me on. I mean, I felt the reactive forces, but they were never explained before. And the way the real key to it was understanding how the chainsaw cut. And you had the big tooth, and you showed the chisel, the side plate, the depth gauge. Like even that was like, what? That's a raker. What are you talking about? All of these things that I had no concept that they would be called anything different, and it really challenged me. Like, and I have to say, like, it was the ArborMaster series, so everyone had to take chainsaw to move into rigging, and that's what everyone wanted to take. We all want to take climbing and rigging, but I've been falling trees, and I was one of those. But I organized the series, and I was, the second series they ever held in Canada. I organized it, and you came and taught chainsaw, and I was like, well, I guess I got to take it. But it was probably the most pivotal part of the whole program. you know,
I'm sorry I messed you up that bad, Dwayne. I didn't mean to.
Well, it was all a good thing, and it just goes to show you don't know what you don't know, and and yet I can't imagine what it must have been like, uh, in the early days, I guess you could say, because I think it's a little bit more accepted now, but it's still, you're right, it's still, you still hear so often like people struggle, like, what are you doing? It's supposed to be 45. It's just it's
Yeah,
amazing, especially when you think about that, how long the chainsaw's actually been used in production falling goes what to the 50s at the earliest. Like even in the 50s, a lot of production falling was still cross-cutting axes. Like it was what when Oregon really perfected that tooth design, the late early 60s is before it really took off. Isn't that true? Like it's astonishing. And so in those, you started teaching in the 80s already. It's only 20 years into it, and yet it's so entrenched. It's got to have historical remnants into cross-cutting and axes. It has to, for it to be so entrenched.
yeah. It's the same mechanics. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
you know. It's just like a lot of times people will take a skid steer or a excavator or something like that instead of using rope and rigging. It's the same. It's the same concept.
yep.
Your plan still comes together. You're just adding a different tool in there to work with. And then speed and efficiency are all relative to whatever somebody thinks it is. And like people always used to say that, you can't cut the trees as fast cutting that way. Well, I sat there and watched. We did a thing with Auburn University, and they were doing a time study with Scott Paper Company. We were down near Greenville, Alabama, and they had 10 trees marked for Soren to cut. They wired him up with all these monitors checking his heart and temperature and all that because you can't work with all these clothes on. And so then he goes over and he had to calculate where he was going to put those trees and put them on the ground. He didn't have to limb and buck them at that time, but he had to put them on the ground in a pattern. And basically those 10 trees, he averaged a minute and 10 seconds apiece. And some of them, about probably 3 or 4 of them, he had to wedge, if I remember correctly. And it's just like bang, 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 bang. I mean, he had a picture in his head of what he was going to do. He checked the tree, takes about 10 seconds, and now he's laying that tree exactly where he wants it to go. And so all those trees are in the proper position. They're not hung up. They're not splitting and throwing stuff. They're not, the hinges aren't pulled fiber, and everybody's just sitting there Google-eyed. Well, unless you see that, you don't realize how fast it can be by having a clear plan and practicing it. And that's just like you guys climbing.
Yeah.
I mean, I sit there and watch that, and I watch you and Rip and Ken go up the ropes so fast, and I did that for 2 or 3 years. Well, I said, well, I'm going to try it. I get up there and I got to call Laura to get me down. I mean, it's something where, but all the new equipment's helped a little bit, but I still don't go up there because, but it's something where when you start to think through it, it's all relevant to what your plan is and how you practice it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the learning curve and it's being, I think, open to try and at least learn. Like, I recall particularly the steerage was something I was really challenged with, and that you can direct the tree by thick and thin hinge, and I was taught that, and I believed it, and I did it, and I would steer trees, and I would be right there by the stump, where I feel very uncomfortable now. I feel like I'm highly exposed to massive risk when I'm right close to the tree as it falls. So I just don't do it anymore. But I used to do it and think nothing of it. And swing trees, turn them here and there, and kind of show off at times.
We used to teach that. We used to teach it.
Yeah, I did too. And you challenged that big time. It was probably the one part of the whole class where I couldn't accept it. And you said, try it, man. Just when next time you got a bunch of trees to fell, and I did. And you always mentioned, like, you don't cut them while they're falling. Just leave it. And I said, doesn't matter. But sure enough, the thick fiber would pull and it would catch up to the other side, and there they'd go one after the other. And I had a job there. I was clearing a lot, and I had probably a couple hundred trees to fell, all different sizes, and I couldn't make it work once.
Yeah.
So I finally accepted it, and I had to accept this concept of the 5-15-90 rule, which is why I think I thought I learned it from you, and that we've been recently talking about that. We've never been a political podcast, but recently there's been someone talking about that rule is invalid, because trees don't take 15 seconds to fall, and that you should be more than 5 feet away. Because we use this escape route concept of being to impress home, and we say that 90% of falling fatalities or injuries occur within 5 feet of the stump within 15 seconds of when the tree starts to fall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to teach the concept. Once you're more than 5 feet away, your chances of being struck are reduced by 90%. And it only gets better the further you go. But it's tied to a speed element. Like, you don't want to go too fast and be crazy, but you don't want to stay there while it's falling, because that's the danger zone. And I've been trying to figure out where that came from, and we recently had a conversation about that. But you recall it just being something you heard from being up here or something.
I thought I heard it from you, so I don't know. That's the reason why I said you're gonna have to hone it up, and take control of it.
Yeah.
What we always, and it was kind of driven by OSHA and the Forest Service, was, and I think OSHA's figures were 80% of the injuries happen within 15 foot of the stump, and so that's what we always had kind of used. But I think it's probably accurate, and I did read it somewhere. Either you printed it or somebody,
Oh yeah.
and I had it pictured from Canada. It might have been the what do they call it? The Canadian Forestry something.
Well, I can't find any documentation of it as of yet in Canada. I've researched it, and I did have a recent conversation with Rip, and Rip's been on the podcast as well. But anyways, I talked to him last week, and he doesn't recall where it came from either. Like, he doesn't, and he wasn't even aware of it. He said he never has used it in trainings, which surprised me. And Tony's recollection of it comes from the training he's taken with myself as well.
What was that? There was a video series that it was Canadian worker safety or forest worker safety or something like that. Seems like that's where I had seen it, but I think I had talked to you about it before. I think it was on, it's an older series. It shows kind of bucking and stuff on hillsides and butt rebounds and barber chairs and all that kind of stuff. Seems like that's the first place. And about the same time we discussed it, but that's been 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, something.
Well, I mean, I've been wrong on a lot of things, so I don't want to say I'm 100% sure, but I'm in the 90 percentile range on that. I didn't just make it up. I didn't come up with it, but I can't for the life of me remember where it came from. And all these years, I've credited you for it, and now I comes to find out and I have, honestly, I thought I learned it from you. So I don't know where it came from, but regardless, I think what the point is in all of these cases is let's get away from the tree as it falls as soon as possible. And that's the bottom line. I don't think anyone's in disagreement on that. And it can be a bit of a semantic, and if you want to call it, like I talked to Scott Profit about it, he said, I don't care if you call it the Pink Bunny Trail, as long as you use, because that was another thing that came up, is calling it an escape route. He felt that retreat path was a better term as well. But, whatever you call it, whatever time frame you put around it, the further the faster, the safer. The further you are, the quicker you get away. The further you get away, the safer you are. I think is bottom line.
Well, the definite is in all parts of the world, whether it's arboriculture or logging or firewood or even the number one injury they say in deer hunting is struck bys.
Right.
You know,
Right.
either a dead limb or a limb falls out of a tree while somebody's in the woods sitting there, or either they fall out of a stand and hit it. But it's something where that's uh, that's a fact that struck bys is the number one in all of them. I was looking at the thing that they had at TCIA. There was somebody who was doing an updated version on workplace injuries, and struck bys was number one. That was last fall, I think, when they had that on the program.
Yep. Oh yeah. They they talk about it every year. They gather the stats now, and OSHA has a category for arborists. So we they stay on top of it as far as reported accidents go and fatalities particularly. But struck by is usually number one. Sometimes it changes places with falls. Falls is number one or two, which makes sense, for arborists.
Hmm.
But I think last year falls actually was number one and struck by was two. But they're always close. Usually, struck by is number one though, and I think if you overall, I think it still is in the number one slot. Tony, you've been quiet and listening like you do, which is great. I don't. I appreciate that quality, and you're our sound guy, and you're making sure everything's working well. But as we've been talking here, I know you learned the techniques that we always trace back to Tim in the game of logging. But what was your journey into this foray of open notch and getting away from the tree? Did you steer trees? Like where do you sit on all this?
No, when I was younger, I wasn't really allowed to run a saw very much. Being the youngest of three, I was the firewood stacker. Um, my father with a forestry background and an arboriculture background was running the saw, and then my older brother. So when I did learn to fall, as probably a teenager, it was the classic 45 degrees, 1/3 of the way in, step the back cut, the standard that would have, and then, having grown up in tree work, I didn't want to be an arborist. So I tried not to be an arborist. So then I left, got out of New Holland as fast as I could. But when I came back, I was decided that arboriculture was going to be a career, despite what I wanted out of life. I think I got onto with the ArborMaster series, pretty quickly and was able. But even then, I still had to convince myself, and I can still remember, learning from Rip and from Ken. They're like, "Hey, you don't have to believe us. Go try this out yourself." And I did. And the steering trees thing, I proved that to myself doing crane removals, right? Because when I first started doing crane removals in the early to mid 90s, the only crane company that would work with us doing tree work, they would only set, all they did was steel construction, and they only had steel chokers. So you couldn't really balance anything. So you pretty much had to tip tie or make everything butt heavy. So we were always pulling things up, right, with the crane. And, and a lot of times I'm tied in there. And so I would purposely make it's like, I called it reverse felling, right? So the big limb would be leaning out, and you'd put your cut in there, and I'd leave one side of the hinge fat, and I had no place to go, right? I was tied right there to the tree, and I would watch it, and it would pull at a steady rate, and it never once moved, right? It never once steered itself. And that's how I kind of proved it to myself. But I said that where people will swear up and down, what they're actually doing is they're still cutting, right? If you take hinge away, you can get things to move, which I've done too with crane removals as well too. So I think I got into it, and learned those techniques, and then satisfied my own curiosity pretty quickly. What I find now, having taught chainsaw training for a long time, is that when arguments arise, it's usually always an argument about a method and not about a principle. Because it's the old, the saying, if the man that understands principles can choose his own methods, but if you only understand methods, you're always going to be a bit lost. And really the principle of tree felling is pretty straightforward, right? And I put it this way: you put a face cut in conjunction with a back cut, makes a hinge that gives you a certain amount of predictability, all other things, taken into account. And as long as the method meets that principle, it might be useful somewhere. Like a home bolt notch is useful. A 45-degree notch is useful. Open face notch is useful, depending what you need that cut to do. There's been times where I've been in a tree and I didn't want the top to go more than 10% before the hinge broke, for very specific reasons. And so I made a 10% hinge.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean where the heat gets generated is always about methods, right? And where the people that argue the hardest, they don't really understand the principle. They're stuck on a method. And if you can teach them the principles, or at least get them to agree in principle to the principle, then you can start to make some headway, I think.
And they're usually pretty experienced people too, that if you can expose them to it very long at all,
Yeah.
they absorb it like a sponge, because they've been doing it by the seat of their pants so long, and they're good at it,
Yeah.
but they don't know how to explain it to somebody else. So then it's like working with a lot of the crews is that, people would have a hard time. I got to do all the work around here. I got to do this. I got to do that. I try to tell them what they got to do, but it's not a training process. It's they end up doing it because they don't know how to explain it good enough to the other people, so they would do the task for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that thing always kind of comes about. It's like people always, I hear it all the time. Well, I kind of cut down trees that way, but you can't use that in the tree. You can't use it up in the tree. It won't work. It's different.
Yeah.
But the method, I mean, the concept is the same. It's like Tony just said, I don't put a 70-degree notch on something I want to break quicker, right? Or if I wanted to go all the way down a hill, I might put 110 degrees on it, because I'm looking at the mechanics of how that hinge is going to work.
Yep, exactly.
But I see and hear people all the time talking about, well, I had this tree, and it's leaning way over here like this. And I started that thing and that thing split and went halfway up the tree and all this kind of stuff. Why did it do that?
Exactly. Why? That's the key. I think that was the key, Tim, that I remember I understood, because I'd had, experiences that weren't the most positive. Trees fall, like I knew that I experienced one time that a tree had a strong magnetic attraction to tin sheds, and I didn't know it was that it was possible for wood to be magnetized to tin, but it was. And but when I took the class and learned about lean and how to assess lean, that's how I all of a sudden realized what happened that day years previous. It was one of the first felling. I was set up. To this day, I was set up. Because I hadn't been allowed to fell a tree. I'd been given brief lessons on the saw. We were in this backyard, and there was this tree, and then you cut this one. And I think everyone, when I think back on it, I think they all knew what was going to happen. It was inevitable, because they didn't know how to fall properly anyway. And it was leaning, the chance of it going in the shed was almost sure. So they may as well let me do it, and I guess it was a learning experience, and I didn't know any different. So, maybe the new guy will get lucky and miss the shed. Well, I didn't. But I never knew why until I took your class, and it was impossible to fall where it needed to go because of the amount of lean it had, no matter what kind of notch I put on it. And I never knew why. I never honestly knew why before that day, and that was also a real. I think lean is probably one of the most overlooked steps of the plant. A lot of people, it's not. Well, let's kid ourselves. Planning in general. But like actually taking the steps to step through a step process of a plan, the 5-step, we've added a step, we call it the 6-step. ANSI now has it the 7-step. But whatever you do, have a plan and work the plan. And that was a key premise in the lessons you taught us that day.
Well, when people take lean, 90% still look at the trunk.
Yep.
It's not the balance of the tree from the canopy and the limb structure. It's looking at the trunk.
And we get optical confusion if you stand there looking up the trunk. You need to get back and take a look around from a distance, right?
It's amazing how that canopy balances that tree, And so once you get that, and you'll never be accurate at it, but you'll find that instead of missing it, 4 out of 10 times, you're going to hit it 7 out of 10.
Yep. Yep.
But it's something that if you can't see pronounced lean as you look at it, then what do? You either wedge it or rig it,
Yeah.
or get something to push with it. I mean,
Yep.
it's that decision that you make because of that. But I sit here and I giggle at Google, sitting there watching people that you can see the way the camera's looking at the tree, all the limb structures on the back side, and they're saying, oh, this thing, and they sit there and have trouble with it. And then the other ones, you got all this stuff forward and they're driving wedges in the back of it.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's comical, but it's sad. It really is, because nobody has ever shared with them and shown them what what that is, and then you got the other variables that cause issues, and that's the wind and rot and bad fibers and close proximities to things, and um, a lot of twisting and turning when limb structures hit each other and all that kinds of stuff. So
Tim, when you think back on your career and all the lessons and all the classes and all the courses, are there any uh, people or experiences or relationships that or even just the whole event, as how has it influenced your life and how you live, like being involved as a chainsaw instructor your whole life? How has that affected you as a person in your daily life, and do you draw parallels from your experiences in the trees in falling classes?
yeah, I've met so many people. I have just been very blessed with being able to meet so many in the different industries. And, when we started off, every place that Soren went, he was kind of celebrity. So I met all the key people in the forest industry and the mills. And, um, and I stayed on the road for several years with that, at least 6, I think. And then when we started uh, the arbor side, and before that, I was doing technical training all over from Alaska to everywhere, um, helping dealers and distributors. And then when we started doing some of the training, it is just opened up to the associations and those kind of things with ISA, TCIA, American Pulpwood, American Forest Industries, all the logger associations. Um, I was at all those meetings, and so I just met people all the time that were as fired up about it as I was. So it always was fun to be, although it takes a lot of time away from family and those kinds of things, and then uh, working till I guess I run myself down a couple times with the colon cancer the first time, and then the second time, and you let things go. But I was just having so much fun at it, meeting people and sharing and getting all this stuff out there. So, and I've been very fortunate. I made a very successful living with it. Always kind of working for myself. Even when I was with Husqvarna, I was on contract. In other words, they licensed out my company, and so it was. It's just the industry has been good to me. Chainsaws have been very good to me over the years. So, and trees keep growing and give me something to do. So,
What do you think the future of even just chainsaw training, and is there still much to be done? Is it still there's lots of potential still out there? Like, I feel like in my experience with it, it almost like we're still scratching the surface of the amount of people out there actually using saws.
it's amazing. Every place that I go, people have never heard of it, never seen it. I was just discussing with a client this week from up in New England, and it's kind of like and what I did, I kind of swapped over to the city, county, and state when um, we passed the game of logging over to New York Lumbermen's Trust, and then basically we had Arbor games off of that, became ArborMaster, and then I pull out that, and then went back just to working with forest apps and getting the chainsaw side of it continued on. And when I did that, I went to the city, county, and state, and that's kind of what Husqvarna wanted me to do, was branch out in that. So we went from logging, which was kind of, everybody knows about chainsaws, and then you go to tree care, and it kind of started to build the techniques into that. And then my next facet of it was going to city, county, and state government agencies to try to build sales as well as the safety. And then for the past, I don't know, at least probably 5-6 years, it's kind of still going city, county, and state, but kind of moved into disaster cleanup and stuff like that. And if you look at the majority of saws that are used, it's mostly city, county, and state and disaster groups. I mean, you start looking at, there's very few tree companies that have 40 saws out there on a site, but and so the need is still there, that if somebody picks up a chainsaw, they need to understand some basics, and they need to think about how that tool works. And then you start to add in all the other apparatus and machinery, and we'll never be done, is what I'm saying, Dwayne.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think there is and it's been similar in our business with when you say city, county, state, or because we have a large amount of our businesses with municipal, with the cities and with counties.
And we were talking about power companies haven't even been touched yet.
Well, we actually do a lot with power. We do a lot with utilities.
Well, I do too. But I mean, what I'm saying is there's so many EMCs and power companies out across the country that it haven't even scratched the surface, and they change employees now like crazy, and so it's a lot of work to do there.
Interesting. One thing I was curious about, and I here I am. I might be, my own belief disproven once again, which I'm okay with that, and I can handle that. But I remember you. I think I remember you telling the story, introducing the whole concept, the whole class, really, talking about the mental toolbox, and likening. I think you used an analogy of a junk drawer, but it was I as I've thought about that and have copied you in teaching that way, because it worked for me, I figured it might work for other people, and it has. But where did you learn that from, or is that something that came naturally to you to introduce something like chainsaw? Because almost every time you teach chainsaw, people come to the class with a certain amount of experience. There's the odd time you have complete newbies, but a lot of times you have someone in that class, or a few people in that class, or a lot of the class, where we got to take this course. What are you going to teach me? I've been doing this. And by introducing it with the way you do, and the way I like to do it now, and I teach my instructors it's a good way to do it, by saying, look, we're here to share ideas. Where did that come from for you? Or is that something you've just always had that gift of teaching that way? Or where did you learn it somewhere, or was it mentored?
I haven't used that in a long time, but I do remember I used it with the service schools.
Okay.
Back, in Georgia and around the country with Stihl, and a little bit probably with Husqvarna too. But that was with the service schools, and it probably, a lot of the thought process came from Roger Simons with Stihl.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever met him or not,
No.
but he was the head of technical services for years, and I mean, kind of a racing engine in his head all the time. He did most all the he would get something, and he was back and forth with Germany with his stuff too. But he would bring something in and figure out how to make it work in the United States and Canada, and he would then get it in production, and carburation, porting, electronics, ignitions, all this kind of stuff was all he kind of got it all finalized on a lot of the equipment. And so when we would do the service schools and stuff for distributor bases, then we'd start to look at, there's a lot of different ways that people look at things, but it all goes back to you gotta kind of organize it and think through the basics. You gotta go back to the basics on it. And so I don't know. It just came about in some of the early schools. I used that, but
Do you remember like the pitch or the way you would deliver it?
I really don't. I remember it, but I don't. I don't remember. I was like, I since I went to hospital in August, I had to go back and look at my video for the old Sam story. So and I've told that 1,000 times.
Well, I don't know that I've heard the old Sam story.
You can see that one on video on the website, on the YouTube site. But I changed it over to that. That was one that I got from Doug Duncan. He was one of the trainers with North Carolina Forestry Association, and he had asked me to do it was right when OSHA had changed the PPE standards, and he'd asked me to come do a talk at a community college on right off I-95 going down North Carolina. Probably 70 or 80 loggers were there. And I did my presentation, and I was last on the bill that day because I was coming down from Pennsylvania on the way home. And I dropped in there, and I did probably 45 minutes presentation. And then I was packing up my stuff. He came in. He said, Tim, he said, I heard a lot of good comments about your talk. And I said, they didn't say much, Doug. I thought they didn't care much for it. Oh no, I had some comments from guys that they never say much, and they said it was really good. I said, well, I don't know whether they're talking about me or whatever. It could have been somebody before. He said, oh no, I think they were talking about you. He said, you headed home? I said, yeah, I've been on the road quite a while, and I'm ready to head home. Been out about 2 weeks. He said, well, before you go, I was going to share with you a little story I heard the other day, a good safety story. And I said, well, what's that, Doug? And I was still packing my stuff in my bags. He said this couple, they were going to retire from the military. They'd met in the military, and they were going to retire, and they kind of fallen in love. They decided to go and get married. And so they did. They worked it out. And they also loved the outdoors. So they were going to kind of build a little cabin on a lake there in North Carolina and kind of just kind of move in when they got married and then hunt and fish the rest of their life, or at least till their money ran out. And sure enough, they did. Got the cabin finished, and they started hunting and fishing the area. And they met a group down a local restaurant. And they'd go in down there and eat biscuits, drink coffee, and sit around and talk about the big bucks and big fish. And they didn't go out hunting or fishing, come back next day, and they'd have a whole new set of stories. And they said one day they were sitting there talking, terrible windstorm and lightning and everything came in, and everybody kind of stood up and said, well, I don't think I'm going to the lake today. It's not a good day for that. I'm going to go into work and get a few things caught up. When this weather clears, I'll meet y'all out there. So another one stood up. Yeah, me too. I'm going to go get some things done around the house. He said, pretty soon they were sitting there by themselves. He said, I never really thought about it. Maybe I ought to get me a good part-time job, at least have something to do on these bad weather days. And, I'm retired, don't want anything full-time, just something, part-time. So I'm going to look around and see what we can find. So next 2 or 3 days, he's looking around, and he picked up the newspaper one morning there. A couple of days later at the restaurant, reading through it, and had a little classified ad. Said game warden wanted part-time. He said, that could be perfect for me. He said, in the military, I was law enforcement. I was an MP my whole term. Then hunting and fishing's up my alley. He said, I think I'm going to go and check in on this. So he got all his paperwork together. And the next morning, he goes down, finds this guy's desk, and lays it all out. Game warden looks at him just a minute. Man, you can start today. He said, you're exactly who I'm looking for. He said, with your background with the military and the law enforcement and all, you want something part-time, this will work out. That's all I got budget for. You can start today. He said, well, I hadn't really planned on starting today, but I got a little fishing trip planned this weekend. But if you let me start Monday, he said, I think I'll take the job. So he kind of left, went on back, got packed up. He and his wife were going to head out of town. He said, on the way out, let's stop by the restaurant. I think I'll tell my buddies about my new job. He said, they'd be excited for me. So he pulled in the restaurant parking lot, and he started at the front door. He said just about the time he started to open the front door, though, it hit him like a stick right up beside the head. He said, I didn't think about this. He said, I wonder what my buddy's going to think sitting down to breakfast every morning with the game warden. He said, they may not want to talk about the big fish and the big bucks. I said, I might have messed up. But he went in, he sat down, waited for just the right minute. He said, guys, got something to share with you today. He said, what is it? Well, got me a good part-time job. He said, that's awesome. What you going to be doing? He said, well, I'm the new game warden. He said, just as he thought, everybody just kind of stared at him. He said, now, I know it's none of you here at the table breaking the rules. There are people out there hunting and fishing without a license. He says, my job to catch them now. And if you'll help me, his plan was, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He started, we'll make a list of those I need to go after first. And he said, all at the same time, they hollered out, old man Sam. Said, this old guy's always got fresh meat on the table, never had a license in his life. He said, that's the one you got to catch first. Well, he had a whole list of people they had, but 2 or 3 days later, it's time to get about his business. So he started checking out around the lake, see where everybody's located. And he actually found old Sam's cabin right across the lake from his. He said, I think I'm going to start off with the big one first. I'm going to go get him. So he get up next morning about 4:30. He goes over. He's watching old Sam's cabin. He said about 4:45, lights come on. Old Sam come out on the porch. Said just loud as he could. He said, Mr. Game Warden. He said, no, you're out there watching me today. He said, I'm not going anywhere today. He said, come on down. I hadn't met you yet. Let's talk. He said, I can't believe it. He said, I didn't tell a soul. He said, must be somebody at the restaurant that was playing a little trick on me. You know, they know who I'm calling on because they know who's on the list. They're calling these people. Somebody's snitching on me. Well, he went on down. He met old Sam there on the porch, a little embarrassed, but he started talking about the big fish and the big bucks. They had a good conversation going. And he said, this guy knew I was out there. You could tell. He said, somebody had to call him. So he left that day. Next 2 or 3 days, he's kind of listening around trying to figure out who this snitch might be. He didn't really come up with anybody. He said, well, maybe it's just a fluke thing. He said, I'm going to go back and check him again in the morning. I can surprise him. So he got up early again, goes over, parks his truck in a different spot. Old Sam comes out on the porch about 5 o'clock, looks almost straight up the hill at him again, said just as loud as he could. He said, Mr. Game Warden, I know you're out there watching me again today, but he said, I'm not going anywhere today either. Come on down. I enjoyed your visit the other day. Let's do it again. He said, I'm so embarrassed. He said, he's turned around and left. He said, I got to figure out who the snitch is so I can catch him and the rest of these people. He went on back. About a week later, he was sitting there in the restaurant. He said that door opened up. This guy come in. He said, Mr. Game Warden, he said, you know old man Sam, don't you? And he got to thinking, that guy's always sitting over there eating breakfast by himself. He might have overheard the people. He could be the snitch. He said, I met him one time. Why do you ask? He said, well, I didn't know if you knew it or not. I'm kind of friends with his family. And he's kind of putting 2 and 2 together. He said, yeah, he's the snitch. He said, why do you ask? He said, well, I'm friends with the family. And he said, they called me yesterday, had to put old Sam in the hospital. He said, he's not doing too well at all. He said, he's been talking about you a lot the past couple of weeks. I just thought I'd share with you. He thinks the world of you. He said, you ought to go down and visit with him and make his day. He said, well, I'll get down there this afternoon. So that afternoon, he got down to the hospital. He found old Sam's room, knocked on the door, went inside. Old Sam's eyes lit up. They started talking about the big fish and the big bucks. But more he got talking with him, he said, this guy doesn't look too good. He said, you know, if he checks out of here the wrong way, I'm never going to figure out who this snitch is. So he said, I think I'm going to ask him to see if he'll just help me out. So he said, Mr. Sam, he said, you remember that first day we met? He said, yeah, son, I appreciate you coming by the house and all. He said, I got to kind of ask you a personal question. I got to know something. He said, well, what is it, son? I'll try to answer it. He said, I got to know who called you and told you I was coming to visit you that day. He said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, somebody had to call you. You knew I was out there and stuff. He said, son, I don't know if anybody called him. He said, I came back a few days later and you knew I was out there. He said, somebody had to call you and alert you I was out and about. He said, son, I don't know if anybody called. He said, well, you came out on the porch, hollered for me both times. He said, somebody had to call you and alert you. He said, son, I don't know if anybody called me, but as far as hollering off the porch, he said, I start my day that way every morning. And so you know, I listened to that, and Doug finally, he said, that's something. And I said, yeah, and I didn't catch on to it at first. I don't think until I got in the car. But then he said something to me, kind of stuck with me. He said, Tim, he said, you know, one thing old man Sam recognized forefront that a lot of people don't is the opposition's out there somewhere. He said, think about it. How can you ever put it in your planning process to keep those unplanned events from happening if you're not aware of those things that cause them? And that's when I started using that safety is really awareness, isn't it? It's an understanding. And that's the whole process of it. So, you know, when we've got all of those things in the drawer, we've got to be able to pull the right wrench at the right time, you know.
And being on the porch calling for the game warden is just, you know, if that risk exists, you just address it right there, right?
It's recognizing that it's there. That's the biggest thing, you know. That 5 feet from the stump, people don't recognize, right? The 15 feet, a lot of people don't recognize.
Yeah. No, you know what?
Yeah.
I think I remember you telling that story, Tim, way back. I might have heard you say it more than once, but I'd forgotten it. I hadn't.
Like I said, I forgot it. I went in the hospital and came back. I had to watch the video the other day so I could do that first program I had the other night.
It's a damn good story. And I think I might have actually told it myself a couple of times. Like, you know, what do you feel about that? Like, I always, when I'm mentoring instructors and part of our train the trainer is telling people, you don't have to invent, man. Like, if you heard a story and a lesson was regaled to you, and a lot of times it is a story, you know, the way something's said and spoke, like there's no shame in relaying it in the same way. If it related to you, it's probably going to relate to other people. And I don't know any teacher, any instructor that has the real heart of a teacher that would ever hold it against someone for using the story that you use or that they use. You know, like if someone wants to tell the same story in the same way because it helps someone else learn, I'm all for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what Soren always used to say. He said, you become professional by sharing. You don't become professional by sitting. And so when you start to think through it, that's the same thing when we started ArborMaster and stuff. Is the more we share, well, this is ours and all this. No, we got to share it because that's really what's going to make things grow, and so that's the whole concept that people sometimes don't understand that. If everybody had new songs all the time, right? But how many artists that are singing, you know, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain or something, if Willie Nelson was the only one that did it, I mean, what would it be? Right? You've never heard of that
Oh
song. I
yeah,
know that's
oh yeah. Who hasn't heard it?
so, so the more people that repeat it, the more it works, right?
And isn't that quite an example of the forest? The forest, like trees, growing together, working together with everything in and around them, right? And sharing resources and sheltering and protecting the young and the old and all of it a cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I never realized that was something. I know that the whole the ArborMaster beginnings and the formulation of the program that was tied to the Arbor Games. I mean, that was did the roots of that come through you, like kind of through you through the game of logging? Was that like that's a path that I
Yeah.
identified, like because prior to your involvement with that, they didn't really have that laid out like that, and they didn't have the concept of how the classes were delivered. In that, let's sit around and
Mm-hmm.
talk. Like that really origins lied in you, and you learned it through Soren.
Yeah, I see that a lot with working with a lot of disaster groups and all. Is that most people want to train the same thing with a foreman or an owner of a company that has employees. They want to show you know what they do and then answer questions, and that's many times what most training happens, and it's positive, it's not negative. But what I'm saying is that Soren got started on concepts of modules more or less, and stuck to these five things, right? And then he correlated it in Europe and stuff to soccer. When he came to the States, he started to look at football, and so a little guy named Denny with Scott Paper and Soren actually came up with the game of logging concept, and that was to take and break things down into five manageable parts. And so we had five on the felling plan, five on the bucking plan, five on reactive forces, five on this, that, as we went through the competition event. And same thing, five things of PPE and all that. And Soren was always one, and this is what I've always preached, is you can tell all the stories you want. You can answer all the questions you want, but if you're doing training, you've got to cover those five things on each segment that you want to get across if it's a program. And so answering questions doesn't do that. You've got to format it. And people tell, well, we don't have time to do this. We've got this and this and this and this and this and this to do. But you either do it up front in training, or either you're going to end up messing with it on the end of it, with either loss of productivity or a safety issue. So you've got to format stuff, and you may just do this module this day and this module the next day, but you got to make sure that it covers everything. You can tell a different story to do it. You can teach it in a different format, but these five things are what the rules are for that particular training.
It basically comes down to planning again,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a lesson plan.
Yeah. Yeah. But you do it in a format. And Soren used fives because he said most people have five fingers, And so when they walk up there to the stump, and he used to be I'm not as much a stickler about it in training for the past few years as he was, but I'll start giving people what's the next step, what's the next step, what's the next step. Just trying to get through a bigger group. But when he started off the training, he had a maximum 5 people in a class, and it went for a whole week.
Wow.
In Sweden and Russia and all over the place in Europe, around the world, they had 18 instructors going to all these different countries, down to South Africa and everything, and every one of them taught the same concept of those 5 things, and so. When he started off, when you'd walk up, all right, give me the plan on that tree, and he would sit there with his fingers, and he wouldn't say a word until they came up with all 5.
Right.
And he probably did a lot better job than I've ever done with it, because I always try to lead them into it. I try to tell them, if they took too long or whatever. But really, they've got to clear their head enough to get those 5 things down. So when you're looking at the tree, you've got a complete plan when you've got those 5 things.
You mentioned 5. I don't recall you specifically having a 5-step bucking plan, and we have taken the planning concept, like 5-step following plan. I like it or not, we added a step. We added equipment as a team discussion that we felt was worth adding equipment into and so we use a 6-step. But we've also used the model to have a rigging plan and a climbing plan. But I never heard of a bucking one. And you mentioned 5 steps on the reactive forces. We always talk about 4. What are 5? Are you splitting one up, or like we use a push pull no go to make it short? Push pull, kick back and attack, or whatever. What's the 5th?
Stance.
Stance for reactive force.
Yeah. So we always did holding the saw out, and then and starting through the stance, and then the other. But basically, the push, pull, and kick is what most people think about out of that.
And then stance is how you like. And Ron Hartel would always talk about stance and positioning, and he would talk about the boxer's stance.
Yeah.
And then Muhammad Ali would have this. He had a right hook, but I'll tell you, this saw has a kickback that's as powerful or more than Muhammad Ali, and you got to get in a good boxer's stance.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what Soren went after too, because he was a boxer, so that was it.
Okay.
But that was what we always discussed, those 5 things when it came to reactive forces, and we did the little bore cut competition. And then limbing and bucking was hazards, and then up and down, side to side, back and forward, and then the cut.
Oh, so is it kind of the lever and sweep concept being?
Well, I was thinking about compression and tension.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So you got to step back and look. And I still have today, I always, guys, you go over to, you say, okay, I dot this log right here. And I say, okay, look at it. Tell me what you got. Is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? Is it going to go sideways? What's going to happen there? And they go, well, I think it's going to go up. And so I say, which side are you going to cut that first? You going to cut the bottom or the top? You got to cut the compression side first. Remember that. And so you think it's going to come up because it's going to drop on 2 ends. That means your compression's on the bottom. So you're going to cut the bottom first and then the top. And they go right up there and reverse it. It gets stuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Soren used to get them to step back and look at it. And then we had the cuts, the mismatch, and limb lock and tongue and groove that we used on most all the logging cuts, so. And then I kind of just incorporated all that into the city, county, and storm damage stuff. So,
well, I mean, I learned the tongue and groove from you in regards to how to relieve a hung tree. It was specifically that somehow we were looking at a hung tree and we were just talking about it. It wasn't part of the class. It was either we were prepping or we was at the end of the day. I don't know where it was because I was organizing that program. So you and I got the benefit of spending some extra time with you. And I remember you showing me that. And it was like, holy crap, that was pretty cool. That isn't necessarily easy to cut either.
No. I use notch and hinge on most of that with the power companies. Just notching and walking the tree up to the power line and let it come down. I've got some good video on that on the YouTube site that I did with a couple of different power companies, and I use it for hung trees, and it's easier on power lines for the linemen and all. Just notch and hinge, and then you can walk it sideways like we used to do with the hangers. But if you walk it straight to the tree, usually 2 sections and it'll come right down. But we use the tongue and groove there, or what you're calling the
Enoch.
Yeah. we use that, if we had a tagline or whatever in most cases.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's a safer way to do it. There's no doubt.
Yeah, because it gets back to that risk and proximity thing again, right?
Yeah. But you'd be surprised how accurate it is with a notch and a hinge. If guys can make good notches and hinges, you can walk that tree down on a hung situation or walk it right off a power line very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we show both. We really show three different ways, and we focus on trying to get as far away as possible. So the key notch, we call it the controlled hinge release or the controlled knee hinge because we're using a bore and a mismatched strap with a rope. Then they can pull it from a distance, and they really appreciate that. And then also just the one that's most commonly used is the mismatch, especially if you have a release mechanism, because they can cut it, it can hold, they can get it away, snap it off,
Yeah.
and like you say, 2 or 3 tugs, and the drops itself will dislodge it either from a wire or a tree or whatever. Usually they're dealing with wires, right? So
we put the canopies up between three leads, and it's amazing how they work themselves out. However it twisted in there, when it starts to move, it twists its way back out, and the linemen are just sitting there, especially the older supervisors. They're sitting there. I can't believe that. And occasionally I'd have one that flip over and get hung, or something, but then use a throw line and pull that down. But
well, and it's part of the plan, like we've adapted the falling plan to be a hung tree plan, and if you look the how it went in, if you think about releasing it and pulling it opposite that direction, you can make a plan for how to actually get it out. But it's taking the time again. It's taking the time to look at it. A lot of the times I find it comes down to planning your work and working your plan, and that's so often everyone wants to get to it, and when you skip that step of getting on the porch and asking if the warden's around, just taking the time to do that as a daily practice. What's my risks today and what could all go wrong here? And just doing it out of habit and routine, like planning. Awareness, I guess you said it was, right?
Mm-hmm. The more you plan, the faster you do it, the faster you can produce.
Yeah.
And maintain safety. That's just the rules. I mean, that's how it works. But if you don't practice the plan, and you just cut, then you never get any faster at it, and then you risk yourself to that unplanned event.
And eventually it will probably catch up to you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And I mean, and there's certainly the statistics to show that too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, it's been really great chatting, and of course we did end up talking chainsaw. I appreciate you taking the time, and again, I want to thank you for over the years, the being open to asking you questions, and you've given me feedback, and you've always been there for me, I guess I could say, ever since I first met you, and I just want to thank you for that ongoing relationship, and I appreciate it because the canopy, your canopy, and your tree in this forest of tree felling and the training of chainsaw techniques you're pretty prominent in the forest when it comes to that, and I've certainly benefited from it and appreciate it. So, want to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate you and Tony taking off with it and sharing it. That's the biggest thing.
Well, I think, Tony, you've seen Tim deliver in other aspects. Like you've gone to and had trainings from Tim before, or was that someone else I was talking to?
No, I haven't had the opportunity to see Tim train. It was always on the list to do, but then always everything else got in the way. So.
Oh, you know who it was? It was Norm Hall who talked about. Norm went and took in a talk of yours, didn't he, Tim? Not that long ago.
Recently, yeah, just a few weeks before he passed.
Yeah, and that's who it was. Yeah, sorry, I confused that.
I've worked with him for over the years a good bit. He was quite a man, good trainer.
Yeah, it was a real loss. Yeah, Norm was. Yep, and I think Norm would have taken chainsaw from you the first time the way I did as part of the Arbor Games thing, didn't he?
Yep. Yeah.
And well, for that matter, so did Rip and Ken. I mean, that was,
Rip and Ken, and Mike Dirksen. There's all kinds of them that really took off with the training in the arbor industry. Mhm.
and I think if I'm not mistaken, you still have the name Arbor Games. Like that's still something that you like could resurrect if you wanted to.
Yeah, I still have it, but you could use it if you want.
Well, I think that might be something we should talk about sometime.
I'd like to get I'd like to get one started with the city and county and the the power companies all have rodeos that they do on the
Yeah,
pole climbing and rigging, and I think chainsaw would be a good addition there too.
I agree.
But I had the chisels in classes too, so I get to see the results of a lot of. It wasn't me doing it; it was just the way the process works that is spread like crazy throughout the arbor industry. So
I was going to ask you if Mark and Steve had been, I didn't know if they had been in part of been in your trainings as well. I mean, it anyone out there, if you ever get a chance, it's definitely worth a cast. And um, I always follow your stuff and stay connected. And speaking of which, there is you on YouTube. You have Thursday Night Saws. Is that something
Mhm.
that's going to be ongoing then?
I've been doing it a little over a year, and we don't have a lot of people tuning in. I'm trying different things, trying to get people to come in, and I've about got the rigging set up here now that we can maybe even get caller in and all that kinds of stuff. But and now that before I was on the road, it was very hard to do that, but now I'm starting to get that down, and the numbers are growing, and so that's something that the video once I post it and stuff over the next couple of weeks, it we get a lot of viewers. But the live thing I'd like to really get built and keep having panelists like you and stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this Thursday we'll talk about personal protective gear, and I got Brian Ellis from over in Alabama. He was one of the instructors at Husqvarna. He's going to talk about some. He's got a dealership over there, and but you're welcome to drop back
Okay.
in too.
Yeah, yeah. I will. I think I could.
It's something that get that, and then I've got some online workshops that I'm putting together, and I've got the disaster group like Samaritan's Purse and those kinds I'm working with, and so it's going pretty good. Actually, it's a lot harder than training out in the field, but
Right.
trying to keep up with all this electronic stuff till I figure it all out. But I've always been kind of uppity on that stuff, but it's tough when you got one person.
Yeah,
I'm sitting there watching Tony; he's doing a good job of it,
I
keeping
know.
all the keeping everything adjusted. But
Yeah, we
yeah, it's
we we decided to make it a team effort, and it certainly is that because it makes it easy for me to focus on on keeping the conversation going, and Tony handles the background stuff. So
yeah.
that's why I purposely try to force him into the conversation right, by asking him questions too. But I know he's busy. And but Tony, is there anything you want to say to Tim before we close off?
Uh, yeah, Tim, I'm just curious, like having trained for so long, been a trainer and taught so many people, what do you think the job of a trainer ultimately is, no matter what they're teaching?
Well, I think a lot of times people said, you can't teach that. You've never logged. You've never been an arborist. You're not certified this and all that kind of stuff. And I tell you, I agree with you totally. But my thing is, I'm a teacher. And like you said, no matter what the subject is, if it's something that I study
Yeah.
and I feel like I can share something that somebody doesn't know, then that's what life's all about. And whether you've got employees under you, or you got people you're supervising, or you walk up on a storm cleanup, or whatever it is, that's I mean that's what it's all about, is sharing. And it might be not about chainsaws, it might be just about anything. And so that's the key. All of us, we need to be a teacher and always looking for pupils. That's the biggest thing, because that's all people will ever remember you from. That's just why I came up and started. Laura came up with calling it legacy program for the instructor base. But is that legacy is truly thinking about where does it go, when you're gone. If you don't have something passed out there like you have. I mean, you got multiple instructors over the years and everything. I mean, it's that's what it's all about. And I think that's what it keeps things going and makes it fun too.
Well, I think it's a big part of it is having fun, or keeping the levity in there, like I mean, we're talking about, especially with the topic of chainsaw and falling. I mean, it's very serious, and there's a lot of the consequences can be, fatal. But to not make it about a fear based thing, but have fun, enjoy yourself because it goes a long way in being safer too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the accidents they say happens is when you're tired and humdrum, and
Yeah.
when you see that on the work site with an employee or a friend, you know that's not a good deal, and so you got to be focused, and the way to do that is making people happy.
Well, and how much of that do you think, Tim, is a part of just overall safety? Being aware of that and being willing to talk to someone about it, saying, "Hey, man, I noticed you're just complacent. You're not. Your mind seems elsewhere, and this isn't the place for that. You could be. Is that is that a responsibility that we have to take with one another?"
I think it's a human responsibility. I think that there would be a lot less issues out there if somebody would say something when they see something. I guess in a lot of different categories, but that's a whole thing of having a friend that you stay in contact with, and you kind of work each other, or whether you got a group of 20 people out there in front of you and you're trying to keep everybody on the same track with a technique or a thought process for work production and safety. It's and I there are some master communicators out there, like you, that have been able to take and keep things focused in a group like that, and then that's what it's all about.
Well, thanks for the compliment, Tim. I appreciate it, and it means a lot coming from you. I also want to just, thank you for taking the time. I know that, we obviously it's not part of our talk, and it doesn't need to be, but I know that you're in I don't know if you call it a health crisis, but you're fighting the big fight right now and taking the time in the midst of that. And you're also keeping up with your, it's why you're doing your saw talks and you have the time at home. And, I appreciate you demonstrating that, because any one of us, none of us knows what our future holds. And it's an inspiration to what someone can do in the midst of it, and, I want to thank you for that too. And it's difficult to talk about because it's a personal thing and everything else. But thanks for being an example of what it's like to endure an illness like cancer and to stay, to keep doing things to keep your mind involved and not just saying, heck, I'm sick, I'm not going to do nothing. You're an example of keeping on, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah. Chainsaws kept me going. That and God, I guess, because that's really the only process that we have. So if you sit back and oh me, it'll eat you away.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Yep.
More people to talk to, more people to see.
Yes.
More chips to make, huh?
Right. Well, thanks, Tim, for your time, and